From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. All right, we're joined by Mark Shepard, finally doing a podcast with you. So I guess the first thing is Weston here is behind the camera.
Hi, Weston.
I'm interviewing you. But could you imagine 5 years ago when we did our first podcast together?
Well, that's interesting. Because have been doing podcasts for a number of years, and at that time I did not think that Acres USA would change hands. It would be in yours now. Yeah. I did not think that. Yeah.
So Mark is definitely the most influential driving force to why we wanted to buy Acres. When we first came here, we were doing podcasts about hunting.
Right.
And we talked about how your system in relation to hunting was actually a really interesting concept, and people that owned land in the hunting world didn't necessarily, they were investing so much money without any anticipation or thought of getting a return, and how to create a system like this that's actually mutually beneficial for deer and harvesting animals, but then also there's a money side to it.
Well, just think about the concept of food plots for deer, for example. You go out, you till up this piece of ground, and you put these annual crops on it, you do some herbicides, some fertilizer, all that kind of stuff. You have all the expenses that a farmer would. You never recoup any. That's part of why that demographic is perfect for a restoration agriculture type system. Why not put it into a perennial system that has the chestnuts, the hazelnuts, apples, currants, gooseberries, grapes, all these different foods for all the different wildlife, from turkeys to bear. I saw my first bear poop a couple of weeks ago. They know that it's this time of year, and they come looking for this place. So why not set up just a hyperactive food plot farm? And if you don't feed the deer, you can harvest it and sell it, as a product. You can graze it and sell beef, sheep, pork, then all the other crops in between, or you don't have to.
Yeah.
And it's a perennial food plot. You probably up front, you'll spend a little bit more up front, but over time, your expenses go down to nothing because the trees keep growing. They keep dropping their own seed. They keep regenerating. There are probably more chestnut trees out here that have been planted by squirrels and by themselves than I ever planted in the first place. Well,
and the traditional food plots for deer are actually just multi-species cover crop blends.
All right, that's all it is. That's all it is. So that's actually something that I don't know if I could ask as a question, and I'm sure Gary Zimmer would have a snap his fingers kind of answer. Never has tillage radish done any good out here. And I've followed all kinds of recommendations, got the right soil balance and all that kind of stuff, and it's never done any good. And then any times I've had any turnips that are thrown in the mix, so the brassica is in the mix, the next spring when it comes out from under the snow, just the reek is so disgusting. I'm just not interested in it. So I stopped including the brassicas in my cover crop mixes.
Yeah. No, it's that's what started me down the path. I read your book. Your book was one of the first books I read, and I was listening. I probably listened to it 3 times in a 2-week period, and I would just drive around your farm
and look at it
and be like, and trying to make sense of it.
Okay.
And then that's when we reached out, did the podcast, and then
from what I remember, you reached out because you were on a webinar that I did, and I showed a picture of a farm down the road. We had 16 inches of rain in an hour, and this guy had this whole upper basin above a USDA pond at the bottom, just been tilled up. His corn had just been sprouted, and rained literally like 13 inches in an hour kind of stuff. And they were just massive erosion gullies going down. But what was amazing about those pictures is it went down to the subsoil, however deep he disked or whatever, and then it was hard as a rock. That plow pan was just impenetrable, and it was all washed into his pond. And I think I called the guy like an idiot or irresponsible or whatever it was, and you got pissed off because that was your uncle's farm. That's what I remember that really impressed you.
I was not pissed off. Okay. But it was, so like, as I read your book, how I would always do things is I would read a book. If I liked it, then I would go try to get any sort of content off anywhere. And I stumbled across something, a YouTube video or webinar or something, and those slides came through. And I'm like, hey, that's the farm that I hunt at. Like, what the heck? But it was also kind of an example of, my initial suspicions, because that was our family farm, was the place that I experimented initially. So I appreciate, him forever for allowing me to essentially just go around 330 acres at my own will, as long as I didn't mess up any cornfields.
Right.
But I always was like, something just doesn't seem quite right about this, and connected a lot of dots in a short amount of time there for me. But still, I don't think we ever thought we'd be sitting here today as, Acres being here now, and you're obviously a super or a big important part of Acres, being probably the number one book selling author that we have in our portfolio of books. So what is kind of the history of Acres from your perspective? How did you get started with it?
I got started with Acres. Now there's got to be some qualifications behind it. I was like 8 or 10 years old maybe, and my dad wanted to do father and son bonding stuff. He worked like, 3 full-time jobs a day, kind of whatever, and was never home. And then he wanted to get us into the outdoors, me and my younger brother, Irish twin, get us into the outdoors. We started going to beekeeping meetings. We started keeping bees. And he had a garden. He actually, like my dad, my grandfather was a hunting and fishing guide. The owner of the lodge where my grandfather was the head guide, whatever, was a doctor. Back then, this is like the 30s, doctors were still botanists because most of the medicines hadn't gone chemical mostly yet. Antibiotics really hadn't happened yet. And so they grew their medicines and distilled and however else they made medicines. I'm not a herbal medicine guy. Well, this doctor went to Vanceboro, Maine, where the Hale family, Roger Hale and his wife Miriam, they had a son that was forceps delivered, and until he was 4 years old, everything was fine. At age 4, he went, nutso or whatever. They tried everything. They're extraordinarily wealthy people from New York City. And then finally somebody said, oh, you ought to take him to see Rudolf Steiner over in Switzerland. So they took a steamer over, they went to Switzerland, and when they got to the place for, messed up kids, what's now known as the Camp Hill communities, the little kid like perked up, smiled, and ran into this lady's arms and jumped into her arms. And, Roger Hale and his wife was like, well, this is where he belongs. So meanwhile, while they're waiting for their steamer to get ready again, they visited the whole scene, got plugged into the whole Rudolf Steiner biodynamic gardening stuff. And then they made arrangements to have Ernfried Pfeiffer, who was the Steiner's understudy, to come over to Vanceboro, Maine. So this goes back to Maine. Vanceboro, Maine is like 100 miles up the road from where my dad was born. The doctor used to train up there with them doing the medicine and the growing of stuff. So my dad, from when he was like 10 or 12 years old, was a biodynamic compost maker and all that kind of stuff, packing the horns and everything. Well, fast forward, now he's working way too hard as a machinist and a tool maker at plastic shops and stuff like that. He's trying to get his kids into agriculture. We go to biodynamic meetings, we go to beekeeping meetings, and then once a year there would be this big conference. Well, back then there were a number of different threads that were developing, and the big conference, the organization that had 501c3 status and had a regular history of having an annual conference was the Natural Foods Association, NFA, Natural Foods Associates. I think they're still around.
Yep.
And so then the NFA, the Biodynamic Association, and then this guy named Robert Rodale and this other guy named Charles Walters would go to these NFA meetings. And back then, a lot of it was like natural foods, it's all about natural foods. And then I first, remember starting going to these meetings in the late 1960s, and probably the early 1970s was when there were a couple splits. Now the qualifiers, you have to remember, I was a 10-year-old kid for one, and then I'm only remembering this stuff based on what my dad told me. My dad was only a witness to certain things, and as he got older, he's incompetent now. He's in an old age home. As he got older and older, the stories changed and stories changed. So how do you really know what was the true story and what wasn't the true story? But this was kind of like what I experienced, and it seemed to make sense to me. One point in time, the Biodynamic Association, Ernfried Pfeiffer, Rodale, Charles Walters, they were all kind of part of the same thing. And I forget who asked the question, but at one point in time, somebody asked Ernfried Pfeiffer a question about certification. We've got to come up. Oh, I know. I'm remembering. Now I'm remembering the story that my dad told me, because my dad was at this one conversation that Rodale told Pfeiffer this is all great. This is wonderful. But what you got to do is you got to cut the woo-woo stuff out of this. The things with like these, formative forces and etheric forces and the horn twirling and the quartz and stuff. You got to cut that out of it. Let's get down to the practices that we can all agree on. We do this, we do this, we do this. Let's codify the type of agriculture that we do and call that, organic agriculture. And Pfeiffer said, no, because if we codify this and it becomes a list of rules of things that you can do and things that you can't do, it won't be just but a few years, then all of a sudden the government will have to take over to be the police force to tell farmers what to do. And it will ruin, like the whole essence of agriculture, which is for the cultivation and upliftment of humanity, is for us to perfect ourselves as beings and to develop a culture of kindness and mutual assistance and all that kind of stuff. And evidently they had quite an argument. My dad was there, and I would have been maybe a little kid, and he's telling me to shut up or something. I don't remember the conversation. And then at that point in time was when the groups split. And so then the Biodynamic Association founded itself, became its own entity. And then Rodale kind of went away. And I don't know if Charles Walters was partners with Rodale for a while before he started Acres U.S.A. I don't really remember if that was the case. But it seems that it would make sense that they would have both split from the Biodynamic Association. And then I could see another split, whereas Rodale would have focused at the time, Organic Gardening, Prevention Magazine, all these little homesteader coffee table, because the people, and this is probably the issue with the magazine right now, the majority of the people who are buying the magazine aren't like the big, 1,000-acre farmers. The big 1,000-acre farmers is part of where our food is coming from, and we absolutely have to focus on them as a target market, but they're not the ones that are going to pay for the educational programming that's necessary. So Rodale, I think, saw that early on and focused on the small-scale backyard, homestead gardener kind of thing. And at that time, the whole back to the lander movement, homesteaders with all the hippies, the Grateful Dead kind of gardeners, was in full force. And my dad was a particular fan and follower of Scott Nearing. And Scott and Helen Nearing, Scott was he was the economist, I guess, that did the math behind all of the reports that went out to show that we should pass child labor laws, and you can't just take kids and put them in a factory and enslave them since age 5, and then the 40-hour work week and things like that. he was a homesteader right up the road from us in Vermont. We lived in north central Massachusetts at the time. And I know that the Walters family has a vacation place in Vermont right up the road. So that would have been like a common overlap when I was little, was going to the Nearing's place. And another person who was right up the road, she was in New Hampshire, I think, was Ruth Stout, the deep mulch, no-till garden book from way back when. And so all of these things at one point in time were all together, and the Natural Foods Associates was kind of like the blanket umbrella organization that would have the intelligence on everybody, and then it gradually split, like in the mid 70s, and I won't say split, it differentiated, totally differentiated, and now Rodale, I think, has, at least in the past decade anyways, now started to focus again on farmers instead of the backyard gardeners.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. Acres was founded in 1971.
Was 71?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you remember going to Acres conferences then when you were a little bit?
I do. I do.
Some of the first ones.
And my favorite thing was going to, because at that time, this is actually one of the wonderful things. What is great about the Acres conference is it had like health and nutrition, which is like Natural Foods Association. It had agriculture and all the different things with agriculture. Then it had all kinds of different alternative ways of describing reality, shall we say it? From pendulums to Paralandra to what's the place over in Findhorn, all this, and crystals and powders, the rock dusts, and then like the science behind the fact that, this stuff, this poison that people are putting on food is actually poison. And it is actually going into your skin, and it is causing medical issues. And so Acres had this great combination of all these different things instead of just being agriculture or just being health and nutrition. It had a really nice combination of them all, because we are, part of a holistic system, and everything does affect everything else somehow. So what I would do at the early Acres conferences, there was the Vitamix blender guy, and I haven't had a Vitamix in decades. My dad had a Vitamix. He got one probably at an Acres conference. And I know that when you would turn on a Vitamix blender, it would dim all the lights in the house. And it would sound like the most amazing, like a Kawasaki motorcycle in the living room. Just. And
what was it?
A blender.
Just a blender that would blend up fruit?
It was the first blender that would actually crush ice. And so at the Acres conferences, the Vitamix blender guy would be there, and he'd be making fruit smoothies. He throws ice in, and then he throws berries in. And I'd like be a regular. It keeps circling, going around the trade show floor, go to the booth, get another shot. These little, like the dentist, rinse your mouth out paper cups full of a Vitamix smoothie. So those are some of my fondest memories of early Acres conferences.
So then how do you get from that to where you're an author for Acres?
Well, how I went to a good school to get a good job. So I went to engineering school, got a job working for the military. I was on, actually, believe it or not, I was on the crew that developed the Kevlar infantry helmet. And I was just a tester guy on the team. There was like 6 of us that were on the team that developed that helmet. And I hated it. And I got to see a helmet that I packed in a box and shipped to Fort Rucker, Alabama. I got to see my helmet land with a guy in Grenada, and then I saw him X weeks later after he had recovered from surgery being shot in the head, and I did all the tests on his helmets. It's like, I have a direct impact on this planet. The things that I choose to do ripple out from me, and this was an extreme example that I am a part of this whole war machine thing, and I didn't necessarily like it. I want to do something really cool. I really wanted to run around in the woods. That's really what I wanted to do, because my dad had been a gardener all these years, and I realized that out in the garden where I'm hoeing and weeding and making compost and spreading compost, and you get a couple little black crumbs on the soil, that's hardly fertilizer. But I did it anyways, and then we grew like carrots and tomatoes and all the garden vegetables you could, but we still had to go to the store to buy like meat and bread and beans and rice. And then after I was done working in the garden, I'd get to run in the woods. I get to run in the woods, and there's food everywhere, more food out in the woods where nobody's taking care of it. And started to think, it's like, wow, nobody's really doing any work out here. And it's organized. It's organized the way nature organizes things. Well, couldn't we imitate this? So I started to experiment with, growing things like an ecosystem. So after my engineering experience, I quit and I went back to school for ecology, because this is, after all, creating natural ecosystems is part of ecology. And went to Unity College in Maine. And while I was there, that's when I got the information about the closing of the Homestead Act in Alaska. And I went up there. I was one of the last people to claim land under the 1850 homestead laws. Got a 5-acre parcel, 300 miles north of town, 3,500 feet up the side of a mountain, lived there for 10 years, and experimented with managing an ecosystem as my food source. Instead of like migrating to where the berries are, or migrating to where the fish are, or migrating to where these plants grow, is try to plant it all in one place. And it was at that point in time that I started taking notes about what I was doing. And this guy said, oh, that's permaculture. So I took a permaculture course. And while we were at the permaculture course, all these permaculturists, while they're eating their rice and beans, they're saying, oh, with permaculture, we don't need gardens and farms. We just grow everything in our front yard. And it's like, look, how can you grow enough calories in your front suburban yard or back suburban yard? We eat too much. We need bigger areas. And if you're going to grow the carbohydrates, proteins, and oils to keep an organism alive, Taylor, you don't look like you're an ounce under 150 pounds. You're a big boy, okay? It takes a scoop shovel to feed you. And so I propose that we figure out how to design farms that will provide our staple crops, our carbohydrates, proteins, and oils, by mimicking a natural ecosystem and then managing it as a natural ecosystem instead of an orchard or a garden, and then harvest the staple foods off of that. And there was somebody in the audience who had some investments they wanted to get out of, and they were the down payment on this property here. So I found myself located here with my wife and then infant son, and we started growing vegetables for cash flow. We're part of the Organic Valley Co-op, and what I was doing was different enough from other people that people would say, hey, we got a little conference over here, come on over and give a little hour workshop and stuff like that. And then the one that when I went there, it's like, oh, I remember this is like the Acres U.S.A. folks. And so I forget. So after the gap of, going to college and having a job and being in Alaska, so it's probably like 15 years, I disappeared from the Acres scene. And then I came right back, and it was like coming home. These are all the people I knew. There were some of the old timers that I did remember, from when I was a little kid, that were still around. And so that's kind of a long and roundabout story of how I got there to the Acres conferences. And then what I had been doing here was different enough that people were trying to categorize it as some kind of organic farming. People were trying to categorize it as some kind of orcharding, and nobody was getting it right. And I'd have to reintroduce everything over and over again. When I started, starting from a different premise. What we're going to do, what we do with restoration agriculture, is we're going to imitate the natural plant community types, the ecosystem of your area. So if you drive by in upstate New York, it looks like upstate New York. But this 100 acres here is heavily loaded. The majority of the plants on that property are all the edibles in that natural community. And so all of the forces of nature are going to be working on your behalf, helping to keep that ecosystem healthy. And I was frustrated. By that time I'd known Fred for a few years. Fred Walters, 2 owners ago, Charles's son. He said, look, Mark, why don't you just write your stuff down, write it into a book, and we'll doctor it up and we'll throw it out there. I said, well, I'm not a good writer, and this, that, and the other thing. And he told me, he probably got this from somewhere else. He says, Mark, sometimes you just got to throw up, and then somebody cleans up the mess for you. I'm like, I can work with you.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. So that's what I did, and he said, yeah, we'll put this book out. You know, it'll sell pretty good for 6 months or so. You do a couple of presentations and speaking engagements about it, and then you write your next book, and it does okay for 6 months, and you can do that for the rest of your life and do well. And little did I know that restoration agriculture, you look on all the different stats, it's actually the #2 best-selling book on agriculture in the United States of America ever in history. It's like, what? Yeah. Actually, Gabe Brown's Dirt is #1.
Yeah, those are the 2 first books I read.
Yep. That was a good choice then. That was
Yeah.
a good choice.
Well, I think from my perspective, it was like I was reading through it or listening through it, and it just makes sense. So I think a lot of people can tie onto it and say, hey, this thing, it makes tons of sense, everything that you're talking about.
If you were to take a third book and combine it with those 2, I think that's all you would really ever need to read in agriculture, and then you would be able to be successful by figuring out, because every context is going to be different, but with Dirt, Restoration Agriculture, and Gary Zimmer's The Biological Farmer, you've got everything you need to be a successful farmer and rancher.
Yeah. Yeah, and it comes down to fitting it into your context,
Yep.
which I think people struggle with a lot, because how many times have someone come up to you and be like, hey, you said this in your book, but it's not really like that. But it's impossible to put everybody's situation into your book or into your context.
Also, what I've noticed as much is people will come to a situation, let's say they got a piece of land in Idaho. They go to this piece of land, they say, I want to do this. And they're thinking of a concept. I want to do a fruit orchard or a nut orchard. Well, first of all, an orchard isn't a natural ecosystem. It's not reality. And second of all, this is central Idaho or whatever it is. That's a different ecological context. That calls for a different type of agriculture than central Pennsylvania, than northern Louisiana. Those are 3 different types of agriculture if you're going to mimic the natural ecosystem. So coming to a place with your ideas of what you think should be, it's your ideas of what you think should be that are the problem. Northern Louisiana is Northern Louisiana. It doesn't care about your ideas. It's going to operate a certain way, and if you don't fit within how that part of the world operates, you're hosed no matter what kind of tech you have, no matter how much money you have in the bank. When you go there, you have to fit into the ecological context and then work with it, and then it will help you out.
Would you say that since you wrote that book and you've been doing consulting, you've been on a lot of different farms, is that the #1 issue you see with people is they narrow in on an idea, and then they can't pivot or make adjustments off of it because it was their initial dream idea,
that's part of it, and it's really closely related also to what I call sparkly object syndrome, and it's even made worse with the whole internet and AI now. If you want to do some kind of regenerative farm, everybody knows that you have to have a greenhouse, and so I was just out in a western state last weekend, and before they called me in, they had done what they did. They're going to do this regenerative farm and all that kind of whatever, and so they had already invested really close to $100,000 on a greenhouse on tracks. They put irrigation over like 10 acres of ground for a vegetable operation and stuff like that, and they're out there with like mini 2-wheel tractors and hand tools in an area way out in the middle of nowhere that there's no place to sell your stuff. There's the grocery store downtown, but the grocery store downtown is getting it off the big truck that's coming from wherever. Where they were located, you have to export your product. You have to have enough to actually get it on a truck and pay for it, and yet they're already $100,000 in the technology that they currently have. How do you ever recover from that? They had an idea. Instead of going to the place, I'm going to back up. Instead of going to the place, figuring out what's the ecology here, what's the reality of this place, what's the ecological context, the economic context of this place. Now, how can I go there and work with that, help it out, and harvest some yields and then, eat it, market it, or whatever, instead of coming to a place, say, yeah, I'm going to do this, 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 and this, and wake up $100,000 later, and you're still paying on the note, and you'll never recover that money. So that is the going to a place with a preconceived notion of what you're going to do, and then making investments in infrastructure and technology that you don't need and will never recover from, just because it sounds cool.
Hi there, just wanted to interrupt this episode to make sure that you have heard about our Acres 2024 Eco-Ag Conference. This year's event will be held in Madison, Wisconsin from December 2nd through December 5th. I think we have put together one of the best lineups for a conference in the regenerative and organic agriculture space. Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, and their team from Understanding Ag, along with Joel Salatin, John Kemp, Gary Zimmer, Mark Shepard, Dr. Nasha Winters, Megan Neubauer, Matt Powers, Nigel Palmer, Will Harris, Jeff Poppin, Aaron Silva, Austin Unruh, Andre Liu, Jay Fuhrer, Steve Diver, and many more. So if you're interested, feel free to give us a call at 970-392-4464 or email us at support@acresusa.com. You can also register online at acresusa.com/eco-ag. Kind of the story of farming.
And just take a look, just do a search for anything on the internet. Just put in a search item. The first thing that comes up isn't necessarily right. The first thing is the one that most people clicked on. And it can be the most wrong thing in the world. And it's first because it was clicked on the most. So those three things combined, I run into a lot of people that they're in trouble because of that.
So how have you shifted your workshops now? Like, what do you think is the main thing that you try to get people to take away at coming to one of your workshops?
That's actually really, I'm glad you asked the question that way. You may have accidentally put the words together that way, but that worked really well. I think more so what's happening is I'm helping to explain these principles, these like ecological and economic principles, and stay away from the details. Because like you had said earlier, somebody said, oh, I read this in your book and you said, and it didn't work for me. It's like, well, because every context is different. And let's use the term stun, strategic total utter neglect. Well, nature operates that way, and most people live near oak trees or at least seen oak trees. And for most years, there's a couple acorns on the ground. Then all of a sudden, like for 1 or 2 years in a row, there's acorns, like marbles all over the ground, just amazing amount of acorns. They massed. So where was I going with this?
You were just explaining, what you're trying to get people to walk away with after a workshop.
So to understand the basic principles of how this plant community type, this oak plant community type, you'll see these trees and shrubs all with each other all the time. They require this kind of disturbance. They are adapted to fire, they're adapted to wind, they're adapted to heavy grazing pressure. Well, now, if this is how a natural system operates, now we go in there and we mimic that. So if you've got 10 million acorns this year, you plant 10 million acorns. Out of those 10 million acorns, maybe 2, 3, 5 trees go to maturity. So stun is mimicked after nature in that if you're going to do stun as a management tool, you have to mimic nature as best you possibly can, which means planting super high density, huge quantities. Because there will be, whether you plant 10 trees or 10,000 trees, you're going to have trees that die. They just will. There's nothing you can do to keep them alive. So why spend time, money, and resources trying to keep things alive that want to die? Let them die. Well, if you only plant 10 trees, 9 of them die, you only got 1 left, you're kind of out of luck. But if I had 100 trees and 90% of them died, now I've got my 10 trees, and the 10 trees that survived are adapted to that place more so than the other ones. There was something they had going on that was right, whether it was genetic or epigenetic, whether it was the soil, who knows what it was, but those trees had something right about them. And now you do the same thing again and again and again and just keep mimicking nature that way. So some people would go to that term, stun, in the book, say, I planted 2 Korean pines and it's been 10 years now and there's not a single pine cone on a single one of them. It's like, well, those are the wrong 2 pine trees. You should have planted 200 pine trees.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. I'm going more towards teaching the principles instead of the details, and then try to explain this is how this works. And if we want to imitate that really, really closely, we'll have a reasonable amount of success.
Would you say the base principle of stun is patience?
No. Oh, no. Stun is ultimately impatient. Because part of what my whole thing here with the chestnuts and the hazelnuts is I want you to produce nuts now, fast. And if you don't, you're done.
Yeah.
And so, like with the chestnuts, if they didn't produce nuts within 5 years, I mowed them over. That's it. You're gone. They don't exist anymore. I don't want those slow release genetics. I want these hyperactive, ready to produce nuts kind of plants. And so, and it's personally challenging because what's happened is I originally started with chestnuts with Chinese, American, Japanese, European, and hybrids, combinations of both. Some are European American, some are European Chinese, some Chinese American. And then some of my original Chinese chestnut trees survived. And there was twice we've had like really, really cold, like overnight cold snaps, like 52 below zero in Lafarge, Wisconsin, just, a brief little snap. But up until the last 5 years anyways, we've regularly had a day or two, a night or two of 40 below zero. And that kills Chinese chestnuts right to the ground. It happened in Iowa back only like 3 or 4 years ago. 90% of all chestnut trees in Iowa just got, smoked. They're gone. So I have these Chinese chestnut trees that have survived and produced seed. So then I've saved their seed, and they haven't produced nuts as fast as I've wanted, but I know that they're 50% Chinese chestnuts because of the tree that they came from. And so I'm having a problem right now is I've got these trees, they're my friends. I harvested the seed, I planted the seed, I've taken care of these trees, for probably 7 years now. They've gone over 5 because I'm trying to figure out, do I kill them? Do I get really hardcore, stay hardcore about you've got to produce within 5 years? Or do I back off a little bit? If I want to accelerate the genetics and make it happen faster, I should kill every single one that doesn't have a nut on it, just because. Because if you're going to take up the ground, I could grow grass there. Yeah. I can grow grass there.
Yeah, it's not much different than selecting with cattle.
That's exactly what it is. It's the same thing. It's a herd of trees instead of the herd of cattle. And if you're waiting for that one to kind of get with the program and catch up, you're always behind.
Yeah.
You're always behind. And then let's go one step worse. So let's take apples back to apples again. You've got this orchard. First of all, you're growing them in a ecologically bastardized system, 100% apple trees. Now there are ones that are suffering. So instead of say, just get rid of it, cut your losses and walk away, now what we're going to do is we're going to buy new equipment and we're going to buy these different sprays, whether they're chemically synthesized or if they're organic sprays. And now you're going to go spray week after week after week after week in the hopes that eventually they'll do okay and do better. And that's a slippery slope, and it's a dead end.
Especially right now.
Yeah. Oh,
do you know what's happening with the apple world?
I don't really know what's happening in the apple world, but I do know that out in Washington State, I'm going there next week. They're basically land applying and disking in, like the quantities of apples is just insane. Yeah. Because the price it doesn't pay.
They can't pay to even harvest the apples.
Right.
They would lose.
Well, you can pay to harvest the apples, but then you're not going to recover that. Yeah. So yeah. I don't know what's happening on the political and economic scene behind that, but that's been not that exact example, but just in my own history of being with the organic movement is when I first got started here in 95, I was making like $22, $24 for a bushel and a ninth box of green peppers. It's pretty good. And the issue was we were having a hard time selling them because not everybody wanted to have certified organic. There was one distributor that carried certified organic stuff, and then most stores, if they had any organic product, it was like the slums. They'd put all the rotten stuff over there, and it was just horrible. It was really terrible. And so then eventually, like Whole Foods got started. There was a store called Fresh Fields that got started, and then much later on, the Trader Joe's. And as that market was developed, then the bigger and bigger operators started to get involved, and pretty soon they're growing them on tens of thousands of acres in California and then in other countries around the world. And when the last load of green peppers that I shipped out of here got $5.50 for a box of green peppers. That's 25 years. So if you do regular inflation, say it was only 1 or 2%, so the prices of all my costs are this much more, and the price I was actually receiving for the product just went right down to the seller. That's the nature of most markets. Is as a market is developed, it's like the first birds off the wire. They capitalize on the highest price, but they oftentimes get screwed because the volume isn't what they need to really sustain themselves. So that's their big struggle. Then all of a sudden there's these breakthroughs, and there's like a sweet spot for a while that people are doing really well because there is a price premium, because it is worth more, and everybody's used to paying more. And then the big operators figure this out. Then the big operators come in and just crash the price until it disappears. And that's happened since tobacco in 1600s on this hemisphere. That's been agriculture markets for what, 250, 300 years now. I don't think it's going to be any different in the future. There was actually an Acres article, I think it was a year ago anyways, about like chestnuts, for example, and the price of chestnuts. That the price of chestnuts right now is pretty good. It's worth picking them and selling them. And as more and more people are planting them, and chestnuts are being planted now faster than ever before. The market for chestnuts as a crop that pays a high return, it's doomed. Give it 3 years, 5 years. I have no idea how long it's going to be, because the big players are getting into it, and there's thousands and thousands and thousands of more acres going in. But that doesn't mean don't plant chestnuts, because if we're having a grazing operation, now we need shade for our beef, and when those chestnuts fall to the ground, they're just gobbling them right up, and that's like corn coming off the tree, and it fattens them up really nice. And those of you who didn't know this, Taylor grazed his cattle on this farm this summer, and because of the market and shipping and all that kind of stuff, they shipped out early, about a month earlier than they could have. And it was too bad, because the chestnuts were just starting to fall, and we're kind of bumming out that, oh no, we didn't benefit from all those carbs. And then I noticed that they actually there's 3 trees that were out in their paddocks that there were no nuts coming off of them. But then I went over there, and that ground is like trampled to death, and there's like cow manure everywhere, and now it's just loaded with nuts.
So it had dropped.
They had dropped, and those trees they were gobbling them up. So
yeah, I would be really curious here on what we could get away with if we brought them, if we were grazing into the winter.
Yeah.
Too.
So back to my point with the chestnuts in the markets, we know that the fresh market price of chestnuts is going to collapse, because the larger and larger operators, even people doing like 500 or 600 acres these days, they're going to get swamped by the people who go put in 10, 15, 20,000 acres. But if you have an operation where the chestnuts aren't like the crop that you're depending on, but you have a mix of crops, and they're compatible with one another, the ultimate source, or the ultimate market for chestnuts, is pork and beef.
Yeah,
it's pork and beef, and then we'll have all of the beef that a grass person can grow, and more, because we have stuff coming out of the trees.
Yeah, the pigs really like the nuts we've been giving them.
Good.
They select that over their feed ration for the day.
Oh, good.
So the lesson of all that is diversity. Have multiple.
Yeah, multiple enterprises, multiple crops, and multiple markets, and part of what I was talking about earlier is if you look at, let's look at the chestnuts again. The cattle went through. The cattle are break even or slightly profitable. That's good. Well, they've basically taken care of all the carrying costs of the land, and then they've mowed the grass, which is nutrient release for the trees, and they've manured and urined on that spot. So now it's fertilizer for the trees. So 2 expenses of the chestnuts go away. So now you have chestnuts, and if you look at what it's going to cost to raise chestnuts, I can just wipe out any kind of mowing. I can wipe out any kind of pruning, and I can wipe out any kind of fertilizer expense that go with it. Well, now, because I had animals there first, I can't harvest for human consumption, but I can still harvest for sales to nurseries. I can still harvest for sales to cosmetic companies, and so on and so on. And so now I'm harvesting a product that, even if the price of that product goes down in the marketplace, that's okay, because the expenses were already paid for by the beef operation or the raspberry operation, all these different things that are mixed in. Once the expenses are paid by one or a couple of the sub-enterprises, the rest of these, you can get lower yields, and you still have more net in your pocket because the expenses were paid by the first 1, 2, or 3 enterprises.
Yeah, I think it was one of the most important lessons that you gave me, because I dove in and I was like, well, this is going to be my full-time thing. This is what I'm going to do. I'm just going to figure out a way to just farm pork, beef, whatever else. And I think you just said, well, you might want to keep your day job, buddy, a little bit. So, diversity in, enterprises is also diversity in, income streams.
Right.
And I think people they want to get away, and they want to get away from the thing that they were doing, the corporate job or the corporate thing. But we're also, to look at a more positive side, you didn't have this opportunity to say, when you left your engineering job, well, could you have worked, remotely in today's age?
Not back then.
Not back then, but now we can. Now you have opportunity where you can go pick up a part-time job and work 20 hours a week online, or, go buy acres and do that. It's not part-time. And
Taylor actually has a job where he takes his clothes off online. There's a channel. The link will be down at the bottom.
Nobody wants to see that. No, it's a balance. It's a life balance too. And I always think, if I'm not, you can make better choices in all areas of your life if you have those multiple income streams.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to make a drastic choice to feed my family on the agricultural side. That seems to be, difficult to navigate, difficult to predict. Younger people in our generation, how are they even going to acquire the land and then produce the thing on it to make a living?
So one of the things you also brought up too is, like, taking care of your family, is with a diversified system like this, the offtake from the agricultural operation is now food for the family. One of the reasons why, my family got to eat all this really cool stuff is I was raising, say, 11 cattle and 11, or actually 12 pigs, because we could eat 2 pigs in a year. And so some of the crop that were being raised goes into our freezer. And when it came to produce, because I did things like green peppers, cucumbers, winter squash, pie pumpkins, that kind of thing, and anything that was cosmetically flawed we couldn't sell, so that becomes food for us. So now we don't have food expenses because we're producing so much of our own food. Well, then what doesn't sell, we eat. What we don't eat goes to the pigs, which we then sell, and then we eat ourselves. So we get more utilization out of the whole thing. And you got to look at the economics, family economics, because now we didn't have the family expense of buying food, which is a huge benefit if you're not paying that money, especially if you're buying stuff that's all grass-fed meats and that sort of thing, and organic produce. Then another part of it that has to be looked at are the tax deductions, because when you're not making a lot of money because you're farming or whatever, even if you are, you're grossing a lot, but you're not netting a lot because of all the expenses eating things up. You want to have some tax deductions. And so to all of a sudden have 2 different enterprises, you have something that's a farm, IRS Schedule F, it has a certain set of write-offs. Well, then another one of your enterprises is a non-farm enterprise. Let's just use you as an example. Your beef and pork operation, that's an IRS Schedule F. Well, now Acres U.S.A., that's probably an IRS Schedule C. They have different sets of write-offs, so you have more deductible expenses in total because you have two different business enterprises that you're doing, and those have to be counted. A negative expense is income. It's because you don't have to spend money on it. So to have two different sets of write-offs is a benefit.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Feeding your family, so you have no more food expense. You got two different sets of write-offs, one from IRS Schedule C, one from F, and then you do have income from your farming operations, a little here and a little there and a little here and a little there.
But let's set the expectation correct, because I think people get a little bit confused on this that haven't been. So normal W-2 employees, I was the same way when I left being a cop. We'll just expense that. You still have less money in your account.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's
right.
still like you're saving, 20, 30% on the dollar, but
Right.
you would technically still have 70%.
And then what ends up happening, though, is you end up paying less taxes, and that's where the money comes back.
Right.
Not it doesn't come back. It's just it doesn't go away.
But it's not like a invitation for people to start a farm to just go spend a bunch of money to write off all their other income either.
Unless you have that much income that you've got to have an expense, because that's actually one of the reasons why farming sucks so bad, is there are people who have so much money that they need to have tax deductions in order to not pay as much taxes, so they will run farms at a loss on purpose.
Yeah.
And then they're selling their product in the marketplace. They don't have the same market pressures that those of us who are earning a livelihood from, and so they help to drive the market price down.
All the people that you think of, like the acre scene and all the people that have written books, how many people weren't or didn't have another income source?
I don't know. I never really asked too many people. But
it seems like everybody's always good at something else.
Yeah, but I'm going to use, actually, as an example, I'm going to use Will Harris as an example, because everybody knows him, or at least knows of him. He's a rancher. There it is. Yeah, so he's a rancher. Well, yeah, hang on a second. He's a rancher. Then he's a marketer. Then he's a slaughterhouse manager. Then he's a rental real estate owner. Then he's a store owner. He had to diversify into these other skill sets in order to support the farming skill set. In order to be a part of the whole system, it's not to just support the farming, it's to be a part of the whole system. So even someone who, arguably, Will Harris gets 100% of his income from farming, well, I do too, but it's not all the actual act of growing products for consumption.
Yeah, you learn those skills other places.
Yeah.
Mine is, was into technology, learned marketing agency, how to build websites, how to advertise, how to sell. Those are all very good skills to have for farming.
Right.
And, probably the biggest one is people learning how to be a salesperson. Go sell your product, sell yourself.
And one of the things I was doing today, okay, so I went to engineering school first, and I worked at plastic shops and fixing things and making things. And then you go away from that for years and start farming, whatever. I was just out today getting my hazelnut processing equipment set up. And it's like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I had the engineering background, because I know how to invent machines and make machines that will do this or that or the other thing. And I can see the process that takes place. How do I get a hazelnut out of the husk? Well, we could do this. And what a blessing it is. I hate fixing things. I really hate broken equipment, and I hate fixing things. I really do. But I'm grateful that I have that skill.
That's a very common. It's a very common first thing for people that get into this regenerative alternative agriculture world, is they come from engineering backgrounds.
Oh, no kidding.
I have found that a lot.
Wow.
I think it's just because and I think of it because I don't come from that background, even though that was, I think, one of the first things that I said I was going to be when I was growing up in 4th grade. I said I was going to be an architect or an engineer. But it's a problem solving, the way your brain works with problem solving. And that's pretty much what this type of farming is.
That's what I was going to bring up, is that engineering basically is everything's a problem, and problems have solutions. And our job is to figure out how to accomplish whatever this is. It's not like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. It's like, no, I can do this. I just have to figure out how. Yeah. And you systematically go through it and apply yourself.
Yeah, and it's something that I think drives these type of people, as you know, you have to have those challenges or you get too bored, and then we focus on naughty things. I mean, that's how I look. It's like I need constant challenge, constant pain, or then what would you do?
Yeah, but I don't need too much. Okay, come on. Enough is enough.
Well, you went through the years of it. Now you can.
Oh, right, exactly right. I don't have any challenges now. That's right. I forgot.
We have challenges counting cattle. So, what are we doing on the farm right now?
What I've been doing, let's see.
And I guess or quick, like, give an overview of like what this farm is currently being used for, how you use it. You know, you transitioned, you made a living with your family. You're mainly producing annual crops, selling to the co-op or the Organic Valley.
Yep.
But now you're at a different stage in life. You do other things.
Right. It started. This was probably 60% abandoned cropland. So it had been abandoned in the fall. We came onto it in the springtime, and then 30% of it was like rocky, eroded hill pasture with grass that had been grazed down, golf course green height, and then maybe 3 acres of clear cut where they took out all the trees, just cut it right down to the ground. And so the transition had been through using the agroforestry techniques, mostly of alley cropping, grow alleys of annuals. I actually, believe it or not, even did corn and beans in the early years. I was doing Vermont cranberry beans for some soup company, some organic soup company was buying it, and corn that I used to sell at Nelson Agri Center. So it was row crops and vegetables with rows of trees in between. And the earliest years with the trees were mimicking the oak savanna. So the Fagaceae layer was, oaks and chestnuts, and then apples and cherries and hazelnuts. And so the big 3 tree crops are chestnuts, apples, and hazelnuts. So while they're young, taking care of the row crops in between, they're certified organic, so it's all tillage, it's cultivators and whatnot. That's taking care of the trees in between. And then as the trees grew, I now had seeds that I would plant. So nursery sales started to be part of the economic stream. Livestock was part of the economic stream. And then as nursery sales kicked in, so we're doing produce, no more small grains. Then we're doing nursery sales, livestock. Then I was planting more trees in the alleys, and we got less and less and less annual crops. On the produce crops, I had 2 acres of asparagus. That was a perennial vegetable crop. So for like the last 5 or 6 years, it was like 5 acres of vegetables that would rotate in a 5-year cycle, from like acorn squash to green peppers to rye clover, back to acorn squash. And then it was probably 4 or 5 years ago now that I stopped shipping produce, and the last produce I shipped was asparagus. And by that time, it had shifted all the alleys 100% grazing. So now where we're shifting to is a lot of the tree crops have started to close canopy. Now the grass is starting to go away. So now we're going to have to cut more trees. And so there'll be a lot more timber being harvested for, milling into lumber. What we see in the background here, the framing of this building and the paneling, I grew this building. I didn't grow the sheet metal. And so now I'm shifting into more on the seed, focusing on the seed breeding, and then, selling the seeds for nursery sales and, forest management.
But you have the ability to leave.
I do.
I think that's always one thing that people get caught up on. It's like, well, how am I going to manage all that?
Yeah. Well, that's actually one of the beautiful things, and even people who are really convinced that this is the way to go, they still don't get it. They say, "Oh, but who's taking care of your place now?" It's like, nobody has to.
We had a tour last week. Who's taking care of it?
Yeah. Nobody has to. It's a natural ecosystem. We have to disturb it every once in a while to keep it in the stage that we want, but that's our choice. and I want this to be 100% grass. And so that's a savanna. It's open enough that we get enough sun to have a really vigorous sod growing. And there's plenty of places that we need to get in there and open it up some.
But right now with this, even with the nursery type style that you have, if you had to, well, like last summer, you were gone a lot more. I appreciate the fact that you're around a lot more this summer, because coming and checking cattle and seeing your nice face is definitely a positive.
Checking the nice cattle and seeing my dirty what?
But if you really had to, I mean, you could be gone all year and you come back right around this time to harvest your
It was actually
seed, right?
2009 to 10. I basically was gone for a whole year. And it came back and it was better.
Yeah.
Everything was fine.
Yeah, and you have a crop standing out.
Yeah, and this crop is ready to go. And then you just walk right in and start harvesting.
Yeah, and if you needed to, you could push levers to increase certain areas of this to where.
That's actually one thing that I have not done yet because all the things that are growing here, every single one of them, we could get better yields out of. And I've intentionally, in part, one, because I'm lazy, and two, because I want to have a little bit of a control in the experiment. What if we don't push it? What can we get out of this if it's like just an easy, lazy little interaction with it? So if somebody comes in here and wants to really make this place hum, they could.
Yeah.
But right now I don't have the ambition to go ahead and push that, because I know what it's like to work 36 hours a day farming. Mm-hmm. And my birthday's coming up. I'm about to be 62, and I'm not interested in working that hard anymore. And because I've gone through the years doing what I'm doing, and my expenses are so low, I grow so much of my own food. I don't even have a garden, and I still have plenty of food.
Yeah.
Because it's a perennial ecosystem. Everything's growing everywhere. I have plenty of stuff to eat. Okay, so I don't have tomatoes. Big deal.
So what's the next 30 years look like?
What's the next 30 years look like? That's actually an interesting question. This property here is in the process of being turned over to a nonprofit organization that will be owned by a nonprofit organization. They'll be responsible for programming and stuff like that. I have no idea when that's actually going to happen. Probably going to take another year. It's kind of a slow process. And then my other businesses, gradually the employees are picking it up and taking it over. So for me, more speaking, teaching, and I do a lot of volunteer work in with service communities, orphanages, schools, people with developmental disabilities, people with missing limbs. I work with an organization that takes care of kids with hydrocephaly and spina bifida, that sort of thing. I work with the Jane Goodall Institute, doing helping with chimpanzee habitat in schools of people around chimpanzee habitat. So a lot more voluntourism.
Yeah. What are you seeing as? What do you hope this landscape looks like?
This on this property right here?
No, just like the general landscape of regenerative agriculture, ecological agriculture. Like, what is the positive outlook for farmers right now?
The positive outlook is that it is known how to reduce your dependency on fertility inputs, pest, disease, and weed control inputs. It's well known. It's well established. Thousands of people have been doing it for decades. That's a known quantity. So you individually may not know how to do this or be concerned or afraid or whatever, and this is not a moral issue if you choose to start walking down this path. There is a way to transition away from a toxic agriculture that constantly fights against something. Let's now align ourselves with the forces of nature and literally regenerate our soils, regenerate the ecosystems around, and now have those ecosystems come within our farms. And so what I see happening, and is a hope of mine that it happens maybe a little bit sooner, is that we see water-managed agroforestry systems that mimic the natural plant community types of an area all over the country. Anywhere that agriculture is being done, slightly off contour, lightly terraced properties that any kind of rain or snow melt that lands on a property, it gets captured, distributed, soaked in, stored in ponds and whatnot, that our streams now can regenerate and rejuvenate. We're cleaning up the water, taking more carbon out of the atmosphere with additional trees and shrubs and bushes and vines. And so we have a really green, 1,000 hills vision. 1926, J. Russell Smith in the book Tree Crops had a little paragraph, and I think I repeated it in Restoration Agriculture. I see 1,000 hills covered with 1,000 farms, with trees overhead and alleys in between, and the animals grazing around, and the streams running clear, and children playing in the squares, and that kind of thing. So I see a rejuvenation of the rural ecology, which in turn turns into a rejuvenation of the rural economy, which helps us to have healthy, happy rural economies and a rich culture and family life.
That's beautiful. Well, come see Mark at EcoAg 2024 in Madison, Wisconsin. He has an EcoAg U Day, and then he will be presenting throughout the conference. Anything you want to say about the workshop? Everything you've already said? And more?
This was an introduction to the workshop.
Yeah. It's only 7 more hours of the workshop.
That's right. Good. Yeah. With lots of pictures and examples and that sort of thing. So.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. We're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experience.